for life forms.
Have you found any yet?
Oh, yes. It's disgusting. Derpy derp. Derp. Like Seinfeld episode.
That'd be fun to have like a version of our theme song that's like the Seinfeld song, though.
Bong, bong, bong. I was turning into the Star Trek song. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. These are the ongoing voyages. Did you hear that she did a vocalization of that song? Yeah, Majel. Not Majel. Everybody
Nichelle Nichols?
Me right now. Yes. No. Nichelle Nichols did a vocal version of that song with words.
Oh.
Yes.
It seems like maybe I did know that, but...
It's like, Star Trek, blah, 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 blah. She had words for, like, and we're going out into the sky.
I feel like that could go along with some of those Leonard Nimoy...
I can't even imitate his stuff, man.
Or the Bill Shatner spoken word stuff.
That I can get behind. I could definitely try my hand.
Whoa.
Sounds like someone's working on a bridge.
That's what we call foreshadowing. Welcome to Dreamland, everyone, the Retroblasting Podcast. My name is Melinda.
And I'm Aaron today.
Just for today.
That's right. Your regularly scheduled Aaron is back.
And today we are talking about Crocodile Dundee, the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, totes legend, because he's not a real person.
What do you mean?
That he's a character that was created by Ron White.
Can you walk me through how Ron White's version of this movie would differ from?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I think oddly it would be the same, but it would just be transplanted from Super Florida to Florida.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or he lives in Texas now, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't know that he's ever had a lot to do with Florida, but...
He seems more Florida than Australia, for sure.
He does. And I feel like he'd be a little classier in a weird way.
That's really sad.
But probably sleep a little more.
There would be way more booze.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much longer he could sustain that intake. So I imagine we're going to start seeing a much more sober Ron White in the specials before too long.
That's not going to be funny.
He's going to be like, so the other day I was doing my taxes. It was sunny. And I'm like, these are hard. Why aren't you all laughing?
So the last podcast we did was Cobra.
Yep.
Seems like a long time ago.
It does. But a lot of life has happened since then.
But so Cobra came out in 1986.
Yep.
And another movie that came out in 1986 was a very different movie, and that was this movie, Crocodile Dundee. And the top movie of that year, was Top Gun. And so I kind of like, as we're talking about this movie tonight, I kind of want to think about all of those movies sort of all at the same time.
Okay.
As sort of a context of like this film coming out in the sort of mid-'80s and its stance on violence and its stance on a lot of other things sort of, within
It's really hard to see this movie and Top Gun as contemporaries.
It's weird, isn't it?
It is. It's almost like realizing what other movies came out with, like Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
I mean, they just feel like different cloths for some reason. But yeah.
Yeah, and I this movie compared to like Cobra especially is just so weird to me.
Yeah, I wasn't instantly just horrified when this movie started. Because, I mean, remember how Cobra, I mean, we just go back in time. It starts with all those crime statistics and they're literally firing a gun at the camera.
Sure.
And this one, it was not like that.
No, it wasn't. So this movie, I remember from the time, did you see it back in the day when it came out?
Yeah, I went to the theater with my parents and watched it
I may have seen this in the theater too. It was a really big movie.
It was.
It was just sort of this fun, like it's seemingly at the time, believe it or not. It was very like innocent, funny,
Yeah.
kind of almost a rom-com, but with a little bit of action thrown in there. So it had a little something for everyone. Kids liked it because he was, almost like an Indiana Jones-esque character with his hat and his, sort of his little one-liners and stuff like that. And he was kind of cool.
Oh, I'm sure I went home and started immediately building like my own little hideaway out in the middle of the woods.
Right.
Even though there were no crocodiles or mini alligators, it was still an emulating kind of story. Kind of like after Karate Kid, all the kids ran outside and tried to do the crane kick. Like it was just this giant, Aikido karate lesson in the parking lot of the movie theaters as the kids walking to their car started crane kicking everybody.
Right.
It was very violent. This is dark times.
You still need to watch Cobra Kai. Anyway.
I do. Wow. Thanks for outing me on not having sat down and sunk my teeth into that juicy tidbit.
You're welcome. So this movie, Michael was talking about earlier how, even years after this movie came out, and I know that there was a sequel too, but you would see the Crocodile Dundee hats when it was, at this time of year in October for Halloween, like the kids' costume section would still have like the Indiana Jones teeth hats. with the little crocodile teeth on them. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely, that aspect of it kind of had me glancing at you. Well, I actually came over here to the Retro Blasting Studios and watched this with Michael and Melinda. And, we could probably get into it later, but there are aspects of this movie that are very sportsman-y, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of wondering how that would, because I know that you're not really into that sort of lifestyle. I was wondering if it would like spoil it for you completely or where that would land. And I feel like this relates to some of the other issues we're going to come across.
It's funny because, I have my memory of this movie. I don't know about you, but having seen it back then, and it's been such a long time ago.
It's totally repressed.
It's like I have the memory of it and just being like, oh, that was just a funny movie. And then when you rewatch it, you're like, oh.
I remember some of the stuff in the bush, like the crocodile attack. Mm-hmm. I remember him laying on the floor because, just thinking that's weird. And the bidet, I just remember I was mystified by what that was.
I did not get that at the time. And I remember asking my mom, and she was like, shh.
Yeah, shh. It cleans the pooper.
Which is really great. A great response when someone asks you a question that you don't like, and you should try it in a meeting at work.
Shh.
Just look at them and like shake your head.
Goes over really well. Yeah, just elongate it out.
Like really long.
Anyway, Johnson, do you have those TPS reports? Who ate my bagel?
And then,
Sir, they're all the same.
If you're close enough, you can just reach one single finger.
Oh, and Christopher Walken them right on the mouth. Well, that would be the end of my brief career. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
Is it better than some of the other things that you could do, which happened in this movie?
Yeah,
actually.
No kidding.
So,
and then I remember the very end because I thought it was stupid when I was a kid.
Oh, you thought the ending of this movie was kind of lame?
Yeah, I was just like, all right, I guess it's time for the movie to be over. Let's just do a thing.
I don't remember. I remember like key moments, like you're saying. I do remember the bidet thing. I remember that's not a knife.
What for?
He's got a knife.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Thing,
yes.
Which we will, try not to spend too long on because it's the most quoted part and it becomes obnoxious that people overquote it and won't stop talking about it. And I remember that just her, like initially kind of thinking he was a total rube, which he kind of is. Like that's his whole shtick. And I did a lot of research into Paul Hogan himself. And initially this podcast was going to be about just Paul Hogan, right? And then we kind of started looking into him and it's like, whatever you think about like some of the aging of the political correctness of any of Paul Hogan's work, not just this movie or series of movies, but also his stuff from before. Because in Australia, he is a well-known celebrity, and the character is sort of derivative of some of the other types of characters that he's done as this larrikin character.
Kind of like an Adam Sandler or one of those SNL cast members who does a character or several types of characters, and then that ends up being distilled down into a a
movie
Billy
or-
Madison
Yeah,
style movie.
that's a good analogy.
That becomes like a cult classic.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of this character, which I think he refers to as the Hogs, is the sort of, like
Yeah.
he calls it the Hogs, and it's just the sleeveless sort of jacket and sort of his bridge painter outfit. And he used it in several places, and then he brought that with some refinement, if you can call it that, to the character of Crocodile Dundee.
Well, the interesting thing, and you have to kind of, I think it's interesting to keep in mind when you're seeing this movie, is that Paul Hogan was like a totally normal dude who was not an actor. He was not on TV, anything until he was in his early 30s. I think in the interview I listened to with him earlier today, he was saying he was like 32-ish before he ever was on TV. And he was like, I think 47 when he made this movie. So he had like a normal life for like 30 years.
He was a bridge painter.
Yeah, he literally and he had done a lot of other jobs that were very blue collar.
He's very Mike Rowe,
Yeah.
honestly. And I've got a picture of him here that I grabbed. It's like a publicity shot of him painting a bridge. I mean, obviously not publicity shot, because I think this is legit when he was a bridge painter. It looks like Mike Rowe is on top of this doing an episode of Dirty Jobs. So I feel
Mike Rowe.
he's the host of Dirty Jobs. And if you're a huge fan of nature documentaries, American nature documentaries, or even Deadliest Catch, if you've watched that, he narrates those things. So he narrates a ton of nature documentaries. He just has one of those serious, comfortable voices, and he gets everybody into the discussion. The platypus here is thinking, where is my mother? I have been here all night and I'm hungry. He's just very kind of, and if we don't make a change to how we're treating the planet now, we won't have anything later. And then it's like, this portion has been brought to you by EG&G. So he's done that. And then he had a very famous Discovery show called Dirty Jobs, which a lot of you out there, that was me. I hit the...
Wow.
Is that really loud in your ear?
I mean, it was special.
My apologies there.
That's all right.
Which was just a show based around him he took a lot of submissions from the audience, and they, it's not, I'm getting this image in my head of like gross jobs mixed with whose line is it? Just like cleaning toilets. All right, everybody, we're clean. But
and go.
But literally, it was like somebody who worked in like a fish packing plant, and so he would go put on the one coverall, and he would work there for a day with his film crew and talk about from start to finish what these people's jobs was like. And so it's funny because this Micro did all of that after Crocodile Dundee, but I felt like they shared kind of an aesthetic and a personality in terms of just being very get it done and blue collar. And,
So now we're Larry the Cable Guy?
no, Micro, it's funny you say
You just
that.
said get her done.
I did, didn't I? Wow, that was innocently used. That was very unfortunate.
It's the Blue Collar Comedy Tour before the Blue Collar Comedy
Ron
Tour.
White, get her done.
Now we just need, you might be a redneck. You might be
no.
Australian if,
Well,
anyway.
and it's a fair point to go there because I think if you live in the South and you either are...
And I do.
And you've been told your whole life that you are like a Larry the Cable Guy, or you were like this is your sign, and it's Billy Engvall. That gets really annoying because these people were so
say.
good at portraying those stereotypes.
Yeah.
This is a good time to point out that the other thing that happened with Crocodile Dundee is that this character did that to Australia.
Right. Later on, towards the end of our podcast, I would like to read some of the things that some actual Australians who are fans of ours said on our Facebook page when I asked them what were their thoughts on Crocodile
Later on,
Dundee.
ask an Australian.
I'm not making them up. They're real.
Okay. Look, I'm just going to trust you.
I mean, I actually, the whole time was kind of thinking that there is something similar in Mick Dundee to like a lot of people from the South because they're outdoorsy. They're not necessarily like super, and this is going to sound disrespectful, but just like not really refined and like looking like to go to get a master's or PhD, in college. Like they're more like, I have a real job, like, doing, something more physical. And, they do the whole tall tale thing. That's the Southern tall tale thing, which clearly is part of this. And it leads nicely into the beginning of this movie where, this reporter from New York City who is an American who pointed out.
Everything you just said, Mick, isn't, who comes from a wealthy family.
That's right.
Is well educated.
Correct.
And also her dad owns a newspaper. So,
she's dating her publisher, right? Or whatever, some guy who's sort of...
That's pretty common. That's recommended.
And her father owns the paper. So even though she's...
So there's no politics going on here.
Initially she comes across as like this really cool, independent woman.
Yeah, she does. Because she's very much like, I'm going to do this thing.
Like, I don't know. But anyway, she comes there under the impression that this Mick Dundee character has been assaulted by this crocodile and it bit his leg off, and it's this huge story. And so she's going to write it up as sort of a human interest story for the newspaper or magazine that she works for, that her father owns. And so she goes there and goes to this little, like, it would be like going to the little town where I'm from. But it seems foreign and cool and exotic to her because she's from New York. But to all the people who live there, it's like they're a very small town. Yeah. They're kind of out in the middle of nowhere in Australia. And so they're like, okay.
Mick is not super famous or super special, I think, to them. I mean, he's very charismatic, and he's written that way in the show.
He definitely has high charisma, which...
But I think the whole idea is that, you have this guy who's claims that he went out fishing, and his boat, he's fishing 200, kilometers away from the nearest town, because that's what you do. And his boat gets attacked by a big crocodile, and it bites his leg off. And then through his ingenuity and perseverance and the fact that he's probably made out of jerky, he crawls and scrapes his way to the nearest town, eating crickets and tree bark and everything. And so that's the story that she's heard, and she wants to come interview him. So that's what she thinks, she's walking into, is this guy who's going to be on one leg, and he's got this grisly story of barely making it, eating snakes, that kind of stuff.
Right. But the reality is that that's not at all what happened. And
he's a confidence man.
The question is he a con man? My question is, did he deliberately spin that yarn and tell everyone?
Do you mean the fictional character of?
Yes, Mick Dundee in the movie.
Okay.
Did he?
So if I say the name Rod Ansel to you, does it jog anything?
Yeah, because I read about it as part of this, and I will say, like, there is a story that's similar, right? And I know the whole story of him getting mad, but I want you to tell it because I know, Paul Hogan swears that it has nothing, like that he was inspired to do Crocodile Dundee when he was in New York City and felt like a total fish out of water. So he wanted to do a fish out of water story in this movie, and he thought that it would be a great mechanism. This character would be a great mechanism for a movie that could be actually Hollywood level and be marketable in America to get, no pun intended, but Australia on the map in terms of like tourism, because as we know, he got really into that, and movies and stuff like that. So, but there is a guy, right?
Yes, Rod Ansel. It is all but confirmed that Rod Ansel was an inspiration to the character of Mick Dundee. And I think there has been some verbal sort of like wink and nod kind of confirmation from Paul Hogan himself. But it was played in a way where he never had to pay Rod any royalties for this. Because here, it's funny that you asked, was this guy a con man? Because the actual story of Rod Ansel is that he was an Australian cattle grazer and a buffalo hunter described to be from the bush. He became famous in 1977 after he was stranded in an extremely remote country in the Northern Territory. And the story of his survival for 56 days with limited supplies became the headlines around the world. He claimed he was fishing when he was actually poaching crocodile. Mm-hmm. His boat was attacked by something large, he said. Mm-hmm. And, I'm drawn instantly back to the scene where he walks up on this boat. And it's got a big bite taken out of it. And she gives him this look like, really, like it feels like a scene in an amusement park where they're like, and this is the place where the aliens came out of nowhere and they bit a hole in my boat, Mm-hmm. And it doesn't stop there. What he does is he gets on his dinghy and he sort of passes out through exhaustion and ends up drifting out to sea and kind of getting on an island and where he lives on his own he told his wife that he was going to be gone for 2 months. So nobody's looking for him. And so he's living off the land, literally eating, hand to mouth, whatever he can find and trying to get water. Like at some point they say he was even drinking buffalo's blood to try to stay hydrated. And then at some point he hears like a horse, jingle jangle as it comes down the trail, and he was discovered and weaned back to health and everything, and then proceeded to build this whole life around, like this whole cult of personality around being this guy who got stranded in the bush and then slowly wandered back to town. He was interviewed by a lot of people from around the world and became somewhat notorious in his hometown for this. And unfortunately, the story gets sad because the general consensus is
I do remember
that
the end of the
he
story.
had some severe substance abuse problems. And there's a lot of question about whether he's even telling the truth about what happened while he was out in the bush, because all he had to do was drift downstream and he would have ended up at a town that was like right there. So he was literally, even though he was fairly far away, he could have just taken the boat downstream to this, but he went another direction and ended up getting more lost. So people look at him sideways like, yeah, everybody worth their weight from around here knows you just get on this river and just float down it and you're going to be at an outpost.
Didn't he sue because he was saying that they basically stole his story and didn't give him any credit or whatever, or he tried to, and it was unsuccessful, and then he ended up getting into a shootout with cops, and hey, sorry.
It's okay. That was me. I just wanted to...
Oh, was it?
No, I was just...
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't me
It was
at all.
me. Sorry.
You were messaging yourself.
I'm super popular.
It is dark. It's kind of sad. So he had a lot of hard breaks in his life. He was not super popular with his own friends and people who lived around him because he got famous, because, as he put it, the people who lived around him had a phobia of being in the news and noticed. So they did not appreciate all of the notoriety that came with that. Then he decided to buy a cattle ranch, and that was around the time that tuberculosis was killing all of the buffalo. So the government came in and said, you have to kill all of your herd, which he had planned for him and his kids and his wife to turn into a grazing herd and start and live off of that. So the government came in and said you had to kill it. So he gets mad at them, and then he's a little idle with his land. So the land where the grazing area is got covered by weeds and became unusable. And him and his wife had to sell the ranch. And they subsequently got a divorce because he, at various points in his life, and then way after that, had some severe substance abuse problems. And he started growing.
It sounds like you really went down a rabbit hole.
I did. He started growing.
Isn't it usually me that takes us into the dark place?
Yeah, I know. So he ended up growing a crop of sellable narcotics. And
so I was right.
And then he started manufacturing narcotics using chemistry that he could find around him and make it into a crystalline. Yeah, he started doing Breaking Bad out in the middle of Australia and got him.
Do drugs.
And he was like mid to late 40s and got him a 28-year-old girlfriend. They made meth. They sold it to people. And then he ended up and here's where the shootout thing happens. He ended up in this small town nearby. He reportedly shot up a house. Him and his girlfriend shot up a house. He believed that the Freemasons were after him and was running around shouting about Freemasons.
Meth is a hell of a drug.
Yeah, he shot up a truck. And then they sent the tactical team out, and this is not funny at all. He shot a.
I beg to differ.
He shot a sheriff's deputy and killed him.
Yeah.
At a roadblock, and then at that point they took him down, and they assumed he was high at the time on methamphetamines.
Well, maybe he thought he was a giant crocodile.
Because in their words, they were like, he could have easily escaped our trap. And they said he threw his gun in front of them and started crawling like a cougar. I read a whole news article about how the real life Crocodile Dundee fell the day he died. There was a whole column in the local newspaper, a whole article in there about it. And it was very very verbose and colorful in its description. And it had an Australian charm added to it as well. It's just, it's always fun to read stuff written in another country like that because there's just a different way of saying things. And so they were I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were terms where I was like, that's a creative way to put that. But yeah, so that was the story of this guy, leading me to believe that while I think Paul Hogan was playing a very careful game, there's no way, especially if you go sit down and read this person's account, there's no way they're not connected.
I guess. I feel like the jury's out on it myself, just because...
Okay, so here we go. So while staying at the famous 5-star Cibele Townhouse Hotel, he slept in his sleeping bag on the floor rather than on the bed and was reportedly totally mystified by his room's bidet. This is an account of Rod when he was taken to another town to be interviewed about his trip to the bush.
Was this before or after the movie came out?
This is before. This is shortly after
Nice.
Well,
maybe
this is
you're
in
right.
1981 that this happened. So there's just too many little like neat spots where it lines up.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, but he didn't go to, well, I think he did get to travel the world a little bit in his little brief claim to fame. And I don't think he ran like a little shop where you could go get trips out into the bush and get a tour.
Well, if you're going to steal a guy's life and make it into a movie, I think you're going to go in the right direction if you make it more funny than that story.
Well, I think he did. I think this is a case.
Unless you're going to get like Leonardo DiCaprio.
Is he funny?
No, I'm not saying he's funny. I'm saying that if you're going to get Leo to play something, you could go Revenant on it.
Yeah.
And make it like, you know.
I see your point. So you're saying Paul Hogan's not a Leonardo DiCaprio?
I'm saying that.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
I was just checking to see if that's true. That's what you were saying.
But what is that guy clearly has some issues, but...
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't excuse the thing. And you're right. He did try to take him to court and was unsuccessful. And that was another piece of bitterness that led to his troubled life. It sounds to me like when you hear... there was a couple things some of his closer friends said in interviews in the article I read that led me to believe that it wasn't really a surprise that he fell so far into substance abuse. And it is kind of like an ongoing, especially in the 80s. And for those of you who are in Australia, I found this very interesting. There's a lot of stuff that was going on around that time where people were suffering from substance abuse. And it was more of a frontier than we
Certainly, if you believe Nancy Reagan.
Wow. This has been
say no, Aaron.
This has been brought to you by the supporters of blah, 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 blah. Just say no.
Just say no.
That is a good...
I love Bob Goldthwait's shtick about that back in the 80s where he was like, he kept like smacking his head. He was like, just say no. Why didn't I think of that?
I know.
I could just say no. And then he's like...
Just be happy.
Like, I'm going to call up Keith Richard. Keith, we don't have to do drugs anymore.
You could just say no.
That's...
The reason that I went there is now arguably, I think Stallone was more legal about how he borrowed inspiration for things like Cobra. Like, it's not a secret that it's based on a book, but it's very loosely based on that book for Cobra.
There have been other people who have accused Stallone of stealing other ideas, though.
Right. So what I'm saying is I think everything was being done the way it was being done, and nobody believed it would be a big runaway success. And when it was so successful, when there was money, something that would have been charming and kind of funny suddenly became something that this other guy probably should have profited off of to some degree. But legal frameworks being what they were, I think Paul was able to defend himself. And this is not the first time that Paul runs into, like, he ends up in territory that makes me wonder if he is, if he's engaged in anything with like Berlusconi and some of the stuff we're talking about with, SDF1 with
Harmony Gold.
With Harmony Gold, because he does get embroiled in these really mysterious tax situations later in his life. Mm-hmm. And I'm not here to make enemies of Paul Hogan, dude. You're a pretty funny guy. But it is, it is interesting that, there is a level at Hollywood where he was already an established star on television and
in Australia.
Yeah.
Television, yeah.
And I think Paul Hogan on the whole is a pretty, like you were talking about, salt of the earth, wholesome guy who had already lived a perfectly, passable life.
Whether he is or isn't, when you know him, he certainly comes across that way in interviews. And
I wouldn't want to marry the guy, but
true.
He says himself, he's like, I'm a bad husband. He's like, I'm good in the beginning, but I'm a terrible husband.
Well, he was with both of his wives for like 20 years. So
right.
I think that's not too shabby.
No, that's about the normal amount before something happens, right?
I guess.
I may be jaded. There was you can figure out what day
How
of the
long
week
have you
this
been married? Just kidding.
Not that long. There was one of the top, front page things on Reddit today was, those of you who got divorced after 20 years, why did you do it and why did you wait that long? And so there were just a lot of stories from people who were like, it was for the kids, or it was crazy. It went from there to like Maury Povich to like Jerry Springer pretty quick, going down that list of responses. But that was one of the other rabbit holes I went down when I wasn't researching Paul Hogan today. You're looking at me like I'm a completely insane person.
Well, medium insane.
Medium insane.
Yeah. I guess to me, like in the movie, going back to the mythology of this movie, it's not clear to me whether he himself was the one who spun that yarn of saying that the crocodile bit his leg off, or if he told the story, maybe enhanced it a little bit, and then upon repeating, the other people around him enhanced the story.
That's just good writing.
Because that's the way it happens in the South. Like, in the people that I know in the country,
tales.
like, it's not necessarily, the first person may exaggerate it a little bit, but everyone wants to have the coolest story when you're sitting down to tell stories, because in Southern culture, and it seems like Australian culture as well, telling a good story is an art form that is enjoyed by everyone. So if you've ever seen the movie Big Fish, it kind of does talk about that there too, where it's not considered lying. It's literally the art of storytelling. And that's how it's sort of perceived.
And kind of how your friends and loved ones may not appreciate it.
Sometimes.
Yeah. General Kenobi.
So someone points out, Timothy Ward, our social media guru, he was pointing out to me the other day that the scene where Sue, the reporter, shows up in the bar and she's sort of first meeting Dundee, Mick, whatever. And there are all these other guys who are like kangaroo hunters, shooters, whatever.
Yeah.
And they're all in there and they're giving him a hard time about, like, they're making fun of him, like, about the whole crocodile thing. And he punches the guy out with one punch. Like, so he starts the physical level of that fight, but then the barkeep throws them out. So it's like, you know, clearly he's, to your point, I guess, he's kind of connected, or he has so much charisma. Like, if he were a D&D character, his charisma would be maxed out.
It's hard not to see that. The guy is a very striking guy, especially in this. He just looks like kind of the Dirty Jobs guy. Like, he just has that kind of rugged, strong persona. But the other thing that I think goes hand in hand in that, and you know, I've been this before, like been the cool guy at a bar where,
really?
Yeah, where like, maybe
do tell.
Maybe briefly, however briefly. There's
I'm not
a brief
saying
window.
I don't believe you. I'm just saying.
But no, just, you know, where you have that home bar where you're from there, and you're,
I see what you're saying.
It's like, it was like for a while where I used to work, everybody would go to the same bar after work,
right?
And we would go there and we would shut the place down, and we became regulars, like our own little Cheers scene.
And now it's a Mexican restaurant,
right? That's oddly specific. I don't know if that's true. I don't know why you would know that. I'm very afraid. But yeah, it's like, then you have a group of people come from out of town and they start making trouble and you handle it. And while they don't necessarily approve of how you did it, there have been many times where when you're the regular and you're consistent and these strangers come from out of town, you can kind of push. I mean, obviously knocking somebody out is a misdemeanor. And in this day and age would not be
well,
something
you
that
could
would
say
go.
So many times in this movie in this day and age.
Yeah, no kidding. But you know, I think I could totally see that happening where he punches the guy out and then the bartender's like, you know, he's family, y'all are not.
Y'all get out.
Get out.
No, I get it. And I feel like, you know, we're going to have to at some point at least touch on the fact that there are several things that happen in this movie that are not necessarily, they weren't okay in the 80s.
No, but
they were probably more socially acceptable and not like as like, whoa, back then. Like, a lot of people probably just rode right past the whole like
there's outright bullying of people.
Yeah.
That today would be like, I would say if you've not seen this, it's worth mentioning there's some trigger warnings for bullying behavior, for, you know, LGBTQ kind of situations where, you know, he walks in and he's being very 80s. And it's not nice, and everybody's sort of happy with the way he's acting, so it could be really uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and that carries over into the second movie as well.
And you know,
I
they
haven't
talk
seen the
about
third
that.
movie.
People who review it talk about how there's something about the fact that he rolled 100 on his charm, that he is able to get through those moments, and it just makes it kind of quaint. Or
well,
it's
also once so. Sort of just real quickly, like the whole first half of this movie is all set in Australia, and they call it in the bush, but you know, I don't know if it technically fits the criteria for Australians. You would have to tell me Australia. Please send your letters too.
No. I think I see that a lot of places, so I'm sure there's more specific ways to refer to that area of the planet.
I've heard that actual
kind of like we
area,
would call it the sticks.
Like that area where it was filmed apparently doesn't have any water
Right.
with crocodiles in it there. So, but anyway,
Which is
this
ideal for filming.
fictional, this fictional place, wherever it is,
Walkabout Creek.
it's all filmed at the beginning. So she's sort of out there and she goes out with him to see where this attack happened. Although why she needs to see the actual location mystifies me. It seems like the interview should be enough. She saw the boat. She could sort of walk around like in the woods and it's going to look pretty much like this. But anyway, so she goes
I think
out.
it's because he ran like a travel firm and offered these tours. Like they were well designed and Disney rides. And they kind of were a little creeper. Like if you think about it, just some dude I just met. We're going to go.
Well, it was a little
fire.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I mean, there's the same exact thing happens in Indiana Jones, especially in Temple of Doom, where they're out, not because she willingly went out there, but because it ends up happening. But they're out and they're camping and, they're sitting by the fire and it's nighttime. And it's like, and this is awkward because we don't know each other that well and we're out here alone and you could really like murder me or do whatever you want to me. And it's just like, no one would hear me scream.
Yeah.
Stay out of the forest is what I'm saying. But
I'm also going to say that, maybe in the 80s, stuff like that probably happened more where people would just end up out.
I mean, I think it still does happen. Maybe it was more in the 80s because
or if you're a camper now, you probably run into people camping where your first thought isn't, I'm about to get murdered.
If you're me, you always think
that's
that.
your first thought when you order a pizza. Like, this man is walking to the table, Aaron. Yes, he's bringing you a pizza. I'm pretty sure he's going to kill me. No.
What's your point?
Just bringing
He's
you a
got
pizza.
a sharp, pointy object.
It's for delivering the pizza to your plate.
Okay.
It's shaped like a triangle.
They're in the bush, and she decides the next day that, she gets mad because he calls her a Sheila.
Yep.
Which I don't know if that's really a term at that time that was used just super commonly, like you're a chick. Is it sort of like saying, you can't do that, you're a chick?
Everything I read said that he was pretty spot on.
Okay, good. That's good to know. I mean, I don't know.
He turned it up to 11.
Right.
So the people who got mad got a little mad that America was
a lot
introduced.
of people, like in the Facebook comments that I read that from Australians, they didn't really seem.
No, he's kind of a hero now.
Sure.
But I think then there was a lot more like, oh, really? Of all the flavors, you had to pick salty. Like that's who you're going to present to the world.
Right.
And now I think people are a lot more like, no. I mean, that's real. It's just, it's turned up a lot, but and I think he has a quote here that I wrote down, which was that he felt like Australia didn't really have a folk hero. And he felt like that was a shame. And he brings up a couple of like highwaymen, sort of, I don't know what they call them, foragers or something. They're bushmen, which were kind of like the Wild Wild West, lawless.
Like the Aragorn.
No, they weren't rangers.
I was trying to give them a silent nobility.
Well, they are sort of folk heroes around there because they were very much against the power. I mean, if you remember, Australia has a kind of a lot of baggage with England. So
you don't say.
Yeah, I know. I was like trying not to get too like actually, but like what happened? Here's what many years ago, Pangea broke into pieces. But so these guys were kind of local folk heroes, but they also started killing police officers and lawmen. So
I have actually heard a whole podcast about this.
Yeah, the Dollop actually did.
Yeah, they did. They do a whole bunch because they go to Australia all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, they talk a lot about that. And so there are some folk heroes, and you talked about this at the beginning. He's kind of against the Tom Cruise, the Cobra-esque, just ultra violence, that went on. And so he wanted to bring a more wholesome, relatable folk hero to Australia, which is a pretty big goal. I'm glad he was able to pull it off.
Paul Hogan himself in an interview says that he has what he's always called a Galahad complex, where he wants to sort of set things right, and he sort of tries to like bring that into this. So later, when they get to New York and in different scenarios, rather than like killing people who are trying to, potentially harm him or whatever, he tries to just, laugh it off and make it into a joke. to show that there is another way to sort of do it. And I think part of that comes
kind of like
from
a Mr. Rogers for grown-ups.
Yeah, but to me, it all comes across as very calculated, especially when you hear interviews with him, because he talks about how he really wanted, like he invested a lot of his own personal money in this movie, along with like some of his friends that all worked. A lot of the people that are in this movie are people and who worked on this movie worked with him on the TV show he had, the Paul Hogan show. Like he had his crew of people, but his goal was to make this movie, I think I said this earlier, that was going to be at a international level that people in America would watch. Because Australia tends to, I don't know if I'd say they tend to, but a lot of their movies, if you've ever watched a lot of Australian movies, they tend to be very local. Like, meaning Michael and I watched an Australian movie that he brought back from Australia. And I can't remember the name of it, but I think it has Kylie Minogue in it. And
yeah, why did you guys pick that one?
I don't know, but something about Miss Minogue's presence in the movie. But it was set in a time and place, and I can't remember if it was the 70s or the early 80s, but it was set in like the suburbs in Australia, and it was funny, but it also like went in certain directions that, at least for me, were a little difficult to watch, with some animal stuff and things like that. The whole movie centers around like this beached whale that ends up getting, and it's I think it's based on a true story actually, where the whale gets beached and then its corpse is there and it's rotting and it's ruining the whole town.
I'm trying really hard not to laugh right now because I know this story.
And then they blow it up, or they try to blow it up, and it like the pieces of it. Anyway, it's just
there's
upsetting. But
actually video of this happening.
I know,
and it's if you want
it's
a
in
funnier
the movie too, but it's
if you want a funnier and more fake feeling version of this than the WKRP in Cincinnati Thanksgiving episode where the turkeys get dropped out of the helicopter.
Right. Yeah,
no actual turkeys were harmed. But the gag is still kind of funny.
I know when Michael and I were watching this, and there's also a lot of like, they kill the dog because the lady just doesn't like the dog. Like it's really a different vibe than you would get. Like in American movies, it's like you never kill the dog, like you're really gonna make people mad. But I guess that's just a cultural difference. Like
there weren't a lot of crossover movies from Australia.
This was really the first big one and
I think you nailed it. I think that there's a lot different about their movies, and they are hyper localized, and everybody's used to hearing English dialogue. I think Australian dialogue has a lot more slang in it than we have heard.
Sure, they have a lot of slang that we just are not familiar with, and so like in this movie, there's a different cut of this movie that was there were essentially two different versions of this movie. One was the Australian version, and one was the international version. And the international version is like either 6 or 8 minutes shorter, but you get differing reports in different places. But it's a few minutes have been cut out, and they were all cut out.
Cobra had a different.
That's
cut.
right. But all of the stuff that got cut out was this first part that's in the bush, and it's because they say that it's because there's a lot of slang that Americans and other people just would not have any idea what they were talking about. But that just makes me want to see it more. And so I was like, Michael, we got to find a copy of the Australian cut of Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah.
And so I was like,
fat chance, right?
I need you to find whether or not there's a way to actually get a copy of that version. And so Michael did his Michael thing, and he dug, and he found that there is one way to get a copy of this. So there was a 20th anniversary, obviously released in 2006 on DVD, not Blu-ray.
VHS or DVD?
It was
I was
DVD.
thinking even further back.
Yeah. Well, 2006, it was DVD, and it's the Australian Region 4 DVD. And so we managed to find a copy on Amazon UK. I think there was also a copy on eBay. But so
we're going to do a little better price-wise with Amazon UK, I'm guessing.
I don't know. I think, well, it was an auction, so you never really know how high that's going to go. But either way, we're getting the copy of it. And I wish I could have seen it before this
Is there any way to
podcast,
know
but
like where those 10 minutes are? So that, or are you going to watch? I mean,
There
I'm sorry.
is-
Let me rephrase. Are we going to watch the whole thing?
we
all
absolutely
over
have to
again?
watch it.
Okay.
But I've seen there's a video on YouTube right now that's got 4.5 minutes of it, and it's literally side by side the American versus the Australian version, and even just like the editing of the shots, like even though they're the same shots, they're just all put in a different order.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand why that would be. The first scene, when she first arrives, the very first scene is this helicopter flying in to I keep wanting to say outback, but it's into the bush. And it lands, and she gets out, and she meets with Wally, who is the older guy who works with Mick. And he drives her in it looks like a sort of a Jeep type thing, into this little town. And they go to this little saloon with sort of a big front porch that's like a long front porch.
For rocking chairs. It's like proto Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, exactly. And so she goes in, but the scene with her and him, sort of, he's telling her about, oh, you're going to get a real good view of the people in town tonight. They have a thing there. Everyone will be here. It'll be really cool. Da 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 da. All of that's cut out of our version. So he has this whole thing where he's telling her what to expect for that night. And in the other version, it just cuts right to like that evening.
Yeah, they're sitting at the table.
all-
Mick comes, enter
Exactly.
Mick with
But in the other version, there's
taxidermy
like
crocodile.
a whole like 30 to 60 seconds more dialogue there. So while it's probably not tremendously different, I'm looking forward to hearing what all this slang is that I'm not going to get. So
I found the quote about Dundee. He said, "There's a lot about Dundee that we all think we're like, but we're not because we live in Sydney. He's a mythical outback Australian who does exist in part, the frontiersman who walks through the bush, picking up snakes, throwing them aside, living off the land, who can ride horses and chop down trees and has that simple, friendly, laid-back philosophy. It's like the image the Americans have of us, so why not give them one? We've always been desperately short of folk heroes in this country. Ned Kelly is pathetic, so are the bushrangers." So that was what he said. And Ned Kelly is
So he's like
a totally different, he's one of those renegades,
yeah.
like a Che Guevara figure. In
so he's
Australia.
like Paul Bunyan
yeah,
for Australians.
yeah, he wanted exactly. He wanted
Yeah.
them to have their own Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed
type of character.
thing.
Yeah. And so I think the thing that that I take away is like, so he wins her over. She kind of likes him, but she doesn't act like she knows that she likes him. And she's like, you should come to New York with me, which is like a weird moment in the movie.
They do foreshadow that because they have that moment where they're, it's at the end of their trip and they're sitting side by side and she says something to him about kind of like really forward about like starting a relationship or being into each other, interested in each other. And you understand they land at a moment where they could kiss, like they have that off ramp that they could take. And that's when Wally, in the American cut at least, shows back up and makes a sound. And he's like, of course. And then he's on the airplane and you have all the fish out of water gags where he's like, cusses when the airplane takes off. It is kind of funny. Although, man, were those airplane seats looking pretty luxurious.
Right? 80s airplanes, and you could smoke. It was amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're always talking about how much you wish you could smoke.
God, I just can't wait to light up. Don't smoke, kids.
No,
but
drugs are bad. Don't smoke. Stay at school.
So they do this whole thing. Oh, we skipped over the part where like they're in the outback or in the bush and they're hanging out together, and she goes off on her own to prove that she's, a strong female and she can do whatever. And he, of course, follows her to make sure she's okay, but acts like he doesn't care. And then she gets attacked by a crocodile and he kills it. He stabs it through the head with a knife. And is that the kind of stuff you're talking about? Like, was that upsetting to me? It wasn't my favorite part, I gotta say.
No, honestly, I think if I had to guess what would upset you, it would be him using the taxidermied kangaroo as a disguise to shoot.
Weirdly, that didn't bother me as much as the guys shooting the kangaroos, which was funny because she didn't like it either. So I'm like,
And he didn't seem to care much also, but he also, it's sort of like he
just kind of
was,
seem ambivalent about it.
his meter of, because the other thing about this, and it's the same for this again, for this character who he's supposedly copied off of, he was fully integrated into the Aboriginal community. So there's two sides of Mick Dundee. There's this sort of like this funny, goofy, you know, I'm a bushman, like rah, 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 walking through the wild. And then there's this sort of spiritual side of him. And so she appealed to sort of that, don't hurt the kangaroos. That kind of sucks. And you see him kind of go, all right. And he goes, and I don't know where he gets this dead. I guess it was one of the dead
It was one of the dead kangaroos that
they had shot.
Yeah.
And proceeds to act like it's got a gun. And they're all so drunk that they don't even realize. They think they're being attacked by a real kangaroo.
Yeah.
And hilarity ensues.
Hilarious.
I do
Not
remember that
funny.
scene from the movie when I saw it in the theater.
I did not remember that. And
It was
I was
very
like, wow,
jarring.
that's weird.
I honestly thought him puppeting a dead kangaroo would kind of bug you. But
Well, it was already dead. I don't know. I guess it really didn't.
you're terrifying sometimes.
You're welcome. So, how do you feel about the whole Kevin Costner dances with wolves aspect of this, where, you know, it's whitewashing, or it's, you know, I don't want to use
How?
that word, but it's more like, oh, he's a white guy, but he is also an Aborigine because he was raised by the Aborigines. And so it's the same issue like that you have with like a Kevin Costner being a Native American character because he's the lead of the movie. Like,
You know, that's a very fair question, and it wasn't one I was expecting you to ask me. I think
we ask
I
the
would've-
hard questions.
No.
Hard-hitting
I-
journalism. That's what you've come to expect from Dreamland.
I think if this story had been about some deep spiritual aspect of Aboriginal life, and he was the heroic figure who came in
Mhm.
with that background and somehow was the reason why they were able to resolve the story.
So if it had been Dances with Wolves.
If he had brought back to them, right,
Uh-huh.
you know, the stones, then I think that would have been a bigger issue. But I think in this case, it's kind of like there's this quirky white guy who was left in the bush and he was raised by Aborigines, and he has that as part of his past, and he can sort of draw on that to do pretty cool things, like where he calms the buffalo and things like that.
Mhm.
And they show him being in a dance like a full member of the tribe when he wanders off and he joins the Aboriginal dance thing, and he's the only guy there, but he's sitting halfway back. He's not really, you know, you don't get the sense that he's being treated like some sort of hero. He's just a well-liked member. I don't
He's
know.
just well-liked by everyone.
I think it's pretty true to anybody who got along with the Aboriginal tribes there. You know, they weren't necessarily the center of attention. He understood the way that their minds worked. He kind of came from that. If the movie had been more about him, like stopping the evil tractors from breaking down the tree full of unobtainium, you know, I would have been like, okay, right. Couldn't an Aborigine have done that too? But as it was, I think this story was really just about this dude, this chauvinistic dude who falls in love with an American reporter. I mean, that's, you know, what is it that they break down the movies into the simple?
I love that description of this movie.
Yeah.
So once they get through all of that stuff, she's like, "You should come to New York," and he's like, "Okay." And so, in my mind,
Okay.
it seems
Actually,
like,
he says she brings it up to Wally and they're against it. And then she says the newspaper will pay for everything. And Wally's like, well, you know, it's good to get new experiences. And she's, you know, money talks.
yeah, and he's just like, I feel like he thought at that point that she liked him.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know she had a boyfriend because she never mentions it. And so they get to New York and everything's going pretty well. Like he has the funny moments on the airplane, and then he gets into his hotel room, which is big and posh. And, you know, there's the bidet there, and he's like, he just turns it on and it squirts up in the air, and he's like looking at it like, you know, and
topology is destiny.
it just, it's
he shouts out the window, it's to clean your bum.
For washing your backside, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, oh, that Mick Dundee.
Wah, wah. But it's funny because they all, like the doorman and, you know, every single person he meets, they just think he's the greatest guy because he just sort of walks up to him and he's got that great Australian accent.
And in some cases, he says and does really terrible things,
Yeah.
and it's just sort of okay.
Yeah, literally when a person who is transgender, or, you know, at the time it would have been, you know.
Yeah, they were at a bar appearing how they felt, right?
Right.
And he was actually kind of attracted to that person in the bar.
Thinking it was a woman.
And he's
this
making
guy,
progress here.
This guy is like, and to be fair, super attractive. This guy that's with him is like, I'm not going to say what he said, but he's like, he's gay, and he didn't say it in a nice way, which at the time, I'm not saying that is a pass, but it's more, to me, it's more reflective of the time than this particular movie.
If you're going back into the 80s film catalog, there's lots of words that we don't use now that you'll hear.
Well, there's a lot of things in a lot of 80s movies that are just not great at all. But to me,
it's like you
don't look at each one of those movies in a vacuum. You look at them as reflecting back the time in which they were made. And in some cases it's good. In a lot of cases it's not good. But I don't really know if there's a lot of utility in sort of calling out this movie and saying it in and of itself is, this horrible, misogynistic, gay-hating, trans-hating. I don't know if that's the ultimate message of the movie. There are those things built into it, and it's not, again, not great. So I don't know if it
bothers you, I certainly understand why.
Absolutely. And if it bothers you to see that and you haven't seen the movie, don't watch this movie because it's definitely in there. I mean, later on at another function, he goes up to a woman who he thinks looks sort of mannish or something. I don't remember why he does it. So to this
he was
person
a very famous on Broadway actress,
right?
By the way, who's playing that part.
But so let's go back. So when he's in the bar and he sees this very attractive person who he thinks is quote unquote a woman,
which I believe is also played by a woman.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
He grabs the crotch.
Yeah, he reaches down and checks the equipment, which is, you're going to jail. I don't think you'd play around with that idea now.
No. And then everybody laughs.
But, and when this movie came out, there was like that happened in the theater. Nobody went,
no, absolutely not. Now they would.
I mean,
but
other
at the
than
time,
the
it's like,
indecency of doing that to anyone.
Well, sure. But I think about going back to the whole, it's a Southern thing. Like if you had a bunch of
I gotta tell you, doing that's
this.
not a Southern thing.
No, it's not. But just go with me on this.
All
if
right.
You're hanging out with a bunch of bubbas in the 80s, and I'm going to say that because I'm from the South and I can't.
I'll allow it.
You're hanging out with a bunch of bubbas, rednecks, whatever you want to call them, in the 80s, and that scene comes on, they're all going to laugh hysterically. And while I do not think, I think that makes it more gross because the face you're making right now supports that's even more gross. That character of Mick Dundee is that, but he's just from Australia.
Right.
So, those people do exist.
That.
And you are kind of like reflecting that. Now, I'm not saying, yay, that's awesome. I'm just saying, I think it's really funny that you've got a character who's both like an Australian redneck and also extremely portrayed, at least, as being extremely charismatic to the point where everyone who meets him likes him instantly.
I think a lot of his foreignness is why he gets away with some of the naive
But that's not true when he's
made.
in Australia.
Well, he's got a bubble in Australia. It's got Donk, and he's got Wally, and he's got his bartender friend, and the rest of the time he's out. I don't think he lived. I mean, remember they got to town and he wasn't there. They didn't know
the
where
crocodiles don't seem to be fans.
Well, it's because he stabs them in the head with a giant knife.
Okay.
Which, by the way, is awesome. It's a great knife.
It's a pretty cool knife.
Not the stabbing of the.
It's crocodile. A little over the top, but it's pretty cool.
Okay.
I mean, it's no Cobra knife. But
I can think of a few other Stallone movies that revolve around appropriately sized knives.
That's not
too
a
much.
knife.
Not too. Oh, that would be a funny furthering of this particular storyline.
It'd be funny to take a clip of Cobra,
and then the newest Stallone knife.
Brian Thompson's holding that giant Cobra knife, and then you just cut the clip of Anyway.
And then you have...
That's not a knife.
You have Paul Hogan do that, and we've all heard that joke.
I'm not going to say it.
And then in the background, you just have Stallone hammering out the new Rambo knife. What? What are you looking at?
I've come full circle.
Yeah, right back to the beginning.
They're in New York, and then suddenly they go out to lunch or dinner or something, and this guy shows up. And he is like the guy in The Wedding Singer. Do you remember?
I didn't mean to laugh like an 80s Saturday morning cat. You just said like an 80s wedding singer. I'm like the movie The Wedding Singer?
No, like The Wedding Singer. Yeah. So like the guy, or whatever, Gulia, the guy that she's going to marry, he is a jerk face and he's cheating on her and all this stuff. And it's the same thing as this situation where, you know, he kind of catches the guy. Am I making that up in my head? Isn't he kind of like a tool, or am I just crazy?
No, they go out of their way to telegraph that he's a tool because he's ordering a drink and they show pouring two really froofy drinks. And you're thinking, why am I seeing them pour froofy drinks? And then two ladies' hands.
I'm getting it mixed up with Cobra Kai. I guess you would get that if you'd seen it.
Ladies' hands pick it up and then, yeah, I was, just walk right by it. I could do it right now. I could just watch it right here. Everybody
Let's
just
do
hold
it.
on.
Okay,
Watch it.
hit pause. Just kidding. Don't hit pause.
But, and then two younger ladies come up and get their drinks, and then he sort of lingeringly watches them watch off. And I think you're supposed to just kind of go, hey, are you with the other girl? That's not good. And then they also reveal that he is off his face, drunk, at the bar waiting to meet her and Mick Dundee. And so they're already having a well-loved and worn, time-honored fight between people dating of how much have you had to drink already? It starts up.
That's always a fun conversation, isn't it?
Oh, boy.
They give you that knowing look.
Mm-hmm.
How much have you had?
We'll talk later.
Anyways, so this guy shows up and it's like, I'm thinking in the moment, like, she had this guy come all the way from Australia to New York and kind of led him on. And then she's like, oh, but I have a boyfriend. Isn't it great? You'll love him. It's like, you cannot be a very wealthy and attractive woman of her caliber and not know when a guy is into you. I don't believe it. I'm not at her level in that way, and I know when a guy's into me. Like, I can tell, even if he doesn't come out and say, hey, I'm really into you, like, you can pick up on the cues. Like, you are trained from early being a girl, like, that you know when a guy likes you. We're not like guys are. We get it. Like, we know if you like us.
I'm a student here. I'm mystified by this whole topic. There's not one version of this conversation where I'm going to tell you when you should know that a guy likes you.
I'm like,
listen, ladies.
Please tell me, Aaron.
You should know
please.
That a guy likes you.
You should know within the first 12 hours if a guy likes you. But
I mean, I'm writing this down.
I just think that she's not. It's almost Princess Bride level. I said it. That's a movie I really hate.
I know that. And
it's because
so many people like it.
No, it's because the female character is so contemptible, as is the male lead character, that I don't like them, nor do I want them to get together. I don't think it's a great love story because she's just a jerk to him. And it's like, why do you want to be with her? It's sort of like when guys are like, why don't you ever like the nice guys? And it's like, well, same thing. Like, she's not nice. She's a total jerk. Have you seen the movie? She's horrible. Yeah, especially at the beginning, she's just horrible. It's like,
she's good at that role. I've noticed.
It's like, anyway, please send your hate mail to
trust me,
Dreamland Podcast at gmail.com.
There's a whole other category of guys who have the what is your problem with nice guys attitude.
Well, that's problematic in other ways.
It is, yeah.
I mean, anyway, so
in the 80s, that was said, I think, with a little more naivety and honesty, without all the stuff that we've got nowadays that go along with nice guys.
Yeah. So here's the thing about the last part of the movie, for me anyway, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. But after the point where, like, I remember that there's a big dinner, fancy dinner, where she's trying to bring these headscarves back. She's constantly trying to bring headscarves back.
I thought she looked like a Bene Gesserit, to be honest. She walked into that kitchen and all I heard was, do, 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 do.
It's true.
Jessica, where is your son? Put your finger in the box.
There's a lot of, like, mimicry of Dune in the sense that there's that whole like thing of kind of like the not Last of the Mohicans, although that is another one, but Dances with Wolves thing.
Wow.
Same thing in Dune. Anyway, we won't go back off on that. That wasn't a very popular thing that I said. I got a lot of hate on the internet for that. We could do a whole podcast on
Already? You've already got hate on the internet?
Yeah, like from that podcast when we posted the Dune podcast on YouTube.
Oh, that. Everybody's going to be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, they all love it when I have opinions. Anyway.
People should be exposed to new things.
It's good for you.
Hey, everybody, Melinda has her own ideas.
Girl's got a podcast. She got something to say.
I'm all be quiet.
I'm quoting you back to you. You said that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Should I be embarrassed by that?
Nope.
Okie doke.
It was good. I think that it gets really boring at the end. Am I wrong?
No, like I mean, definitely when I was a kid, I was bored by the end. I didn't care if they worked it out. I thought she was playing him a little bit, and I certainly wouldn't. Nowadays, the way
was
I look
he playing
at it,
her, though? Because we said he was a con man. So.
I think he was, yes, but I think he got what, he knew what he was dealing with, right? And he was sad about it, and he was going to go on walkabout. Like, he's like, all right, Richard won. He asked her to marry him. He picked up on the fact that I was moving in.
Oh, that's right. The guy proposes at dinner.
To the Bene Gesserit, which is crazy. And that's not good thinking.
No.
You ain't never going to have a boy.
Not allowed.
You know what they say. So I think, he goes ahead and puts a ring on it because he wants it, so he wanted to put a ring on it. And
that's not an upsetting phrase at all.
I'm quoting a song.
I know.
I'm talking about a finger, not a person.
Oh.
So that's what it refers to.
Is it?
Is the finger. You can extrapolate it out further if you want to. Round 1, fight!
Are you getting an attitude with me?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Good Lord. This escalated quickly. Comedy's a risk. Do. What did you... Okay, Aaron has a black eye. What happened? I don't know. We brought up a Beyonce song and it just all went
Is
bad.
that what that is?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a Beyonce song.
Are you going to accuse me of actually knowing that and acting
No,
like
because you're going to bring up the Justin Timberlake incident and it's going to be a mess. There's no reasonable expectation for me.
Can I just say one thing I love about our podcast and our friendship is that we have something called the Justin Timberlake incident.
Oh my gosh. And here's where we degenerate into just us maniacally laughing. You'll have to go way back into our back catalog.
Way deeper and deeper.
To find the Justin Timberlake incident.
That's like the second podcast, I think.
If it hasn't been classified.
I think Timberlake is in the title of that episode. Anyway.
Well, yeah, that is really early then.
He goes, okay, well, she's going to get married to that guy. The only reason I came to New York was not because I want to look at all the cool things in New York, but more that I want to get with this cool chick. And so
And that's totally something a guy would do, by the way.
Okay.
I don't think where on the planet mattered to him. I think he was into her and he thought he had a chance.
Yeah. I mean, I believe you.
How serious he was about it, I don't know. I couldn't.
I mean, there are movies like He's Just Not That Into You where guys won't do stuff like that. But I guess if a guy really is.
Yeah, I said guys will, not all guys. Most guys. Some guys will.
Some guys.
This is a corollary.
Don't make a fallacy of causation on this.
Okay.
But so he does. He goes out and he's like, I'm going to go on walkabout, which I don't know. It just means he's going to walk around and.
That's a real thing.
No, I know Australia. No, I know it is.
Actually.
Shut up. I had a guy at work the other day ask me if I knew what something was. God, what was it? Something really obvious. Like
it was cognitive
dissonance. That's right. And it's like, and he was like 22. He's like, do you know what cognitive dissonance is? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm having a whole lot of it right now.
Right. That's fair. Like, did he think he was going to impress you?
I mean,
like you were going to be like, oh my gosh, this 20-something-year-old kid.
Wow, tell me more.
I can't wait till you're president.
Oh my God.
Of the company. You actually should have done that. Very unprofessional.
Oh my God. What are you talking about?
Oh, stop it. It's like kryptonite.
It's pretty terrible. So, yeah, she does this thing where she figures out where he's going and she sees him, but he's really far away and she chases him into the subway and she finally gets to the point and there's like this scene where she's calling across like, And it's so far he can't hear her yelling his name. And there's just a ton of people in the subway waiting for the train.
I will say this is a very well-written scene.
It is a well-written scene. But it's to me, still kind of boring.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. It was
one of those
felt
things
like
that was
and the end. Like it's suddenly the end of the movie, and it feels very truncated and weird. Like not the scene itself, but the fact that right after that the credits start rolling. You're like, wait, is that the end? Like that's one of
They
the
should have at least ridden off on a motorcycle with her.
with some crime statistics over the top.
Yeah, and a randomly upbeat song.
Every 2 years, someone's killed in this territory in Australia.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's actually, I think it's a lot longer than that. Well, the reason I bring that up is because that Rod guy, when he killed that sheriff's deputy, it was like the first deputy who'd been killed in about 2 years in that province.
Well, yeah, because there's not a lot of people. That was kind of...
That may be a factor in that.
It's like population density of...
Well, I definitely don't want to get away without making a few honorable mentions here. There's an actor by the name of David Gulpil who played Neville Bell. And if you're Australian, this name I think will be pretty big to you because he's the guy who played the Aborigine who wandered into the middle of camp and then wandered off.
I looked that guy up. Yeah.
He is a big deal when it comes to the boundary between, city people and our understanding of Aborigines. He's done a lot, been in a great deal of good productions, movies, represents his people very, very well in some cases. And then he's got his own share of strife, which I don't think you can be of this era and a cohort of Paul Hogan and not also have in your background some sort of domestic violence charge somewhere, right? Like, I think that there's a good and bad. And again, you see the overshadowing of substance abuse kind of touches on this guy's life. And I see that a lot with stories that come out of this from that time period too. Mm-hmm. And I hear that is an ongoing problem with any, indigenous group of people. So, but he has been in movie after movie, has gotten award after award. And I could, if I read this whole list to you, it would just sound like a weird beat poem. But, in the middle of it is this. So I wanted to mention him if you're interested, because he is worth kind of going and looking at some of the stuff he's done, especially if you're interested in
and say his name again.
I will do my best to pronounce it for everyone. David Gulpilil. Okay.
I looked him up before. I couldn't remember his name, but I remember seeing him in the movie and thinking, wow, he's got such a cool look.
He does.
So...
And he did a great
job. Yeah, he's got a great thing about him.
But he narrated stuff and appeared and produced movies and all kinds of stuff.
Real quickly, I wanted to say Michael Hutchence. I don't know if you were going to touch on this, but he, among many of the other people that I know I mentioned earlier, that a lot of people within Paul Hogan's inner circle helped put their own money in to make this movie. And Michael Hutchence of NXS fame was one of those people who put money in. I thought that was kind of a cool, fun fact. There's a cool picture of Michael Hutchence with Paul Hogan as Crocodile Dundee that I'll post on the show notes. It's just a cool, interesting little weird Australian cool thing.
Another face that you're going to look at in here and think, oh my gosh, I've seen this guy in everything, is Reginald Vell Johnson. You will know him from Die Hard as the police officer who is in the shop at the beginning, and also from TGIF television show fame with Mr. Winslow.
Absolutely.
And he plays he's gone on and made a career out of playing police officers. Yeah. And he's even reprised his role in I don't think it was Bones, but it was in another one of those daytime, I think it was Dexter or something. He reprised that role as the same police officer who was in Die Hard.
Yeah. I think I said that while we were watching the movie, didn't I?
You yelled it really loud and my eardrum blew out, so I couldn't hear the end of your sentence. But now that it's better, I'm reminded that you did, in fact, say that. So
I didn't remember his name, but I said, "Isn't that guy?"
Have been credited to Gryffindor.
Ravenclaw.
No, I'm giving it.
You're giving it to Gryffindor.
I'm the teacher here.
You're giving it to Michael's house, not mine. What house are you, Aaron?
I have no idea.
I think you're a Slytherin.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I meant it as
wait till I tell my dad.
I have Were you done with all the cool things, or you have more things?
Yes, you go ahead because there was one other name I want to make sure I have it right before I.
Okay, so I have. It's a little long, but I think it's really cool. It's from one of our Australian fans posted this on our Facebook page, and it's sort of his take on the movie. And so I'm just going to read it. It's from Michael. And I won't say his last name just in case he doesn't want me to, but he says, as an Aussie kid who grew up in a rural country town, when this film came out, it was great to see one of our own, even though Mick was more outback on the big screen. When the film came out, the cinema, small as it was jam-packed. I have mentioned several times before that it was the first film I ever saw in the cinema with my mom and two brothers. I had never seen before or since so much laughter and joy from the audience who would leap to their feet and cheer when the scene with the kangaroo and the gun scene, and especially the scene at the end where Mick climbed on top of the people to get to Sue. This was a one-of-a-kind film for us. I may have been 5 at the time, but I remember how much it swept the nation. To us, Paul, who had already been a homebred hero of ours, who had even been famous for painting the Harbor Bridge, was the every Aussie bloke we could relate to. It gave us a sense of pride, which to this day we keep. My major gripe is when I see kids of today, millennials, who go on YouTube channels and knock this movie, as they do all movies of the past, without knowing just how important and significant this film was to boost Australian confidence, and a film that showed the world that we were our own people and not just some people from down under who rode on the backs of kangaroos. This is why I love this film to this day. So I thought that painted a really nice picture of, like, and that's kind of why Paul Hogan, like, not too long ago, won a big award just for everything he's done for Australia. Like, the tourism industry of Australia, like, was nothing before all of those Australian ads that he did. Like, come to Australia, and I can't do the accent. I'm not trying to. Like, you know, the whole. He talked about in an interview that I watched, or listened to rather, that was with some, and I'll post a link to it in the show notes, but it was with it sounded like a morning show that's in Australia, but it was a podcast. And it's this lady, you know, she's asking him all these questions, and it was kind of grating on my nerves because she kept asking him, like, do you remember when you came up with the line, that's not a knife, this is a knife? Like, what were you thinking when you came up with that line? And he's just like, but, but he did eventually get into talking about, like, his goal of, like, wanting to increase tourism because across the world, if you look internationally, it's a huge source of income for a lot of countries. And at that time, Australia had, like, almost no tourism industry. And so he's like, we've got a beautiful country, lots of different types of environments, really friendly people, really cool looking animals. You should come here. You'll have a great time. It's family friendly, all that kind of stuff. And he even
started that phrase about throw a shrimp on the Barbie.
Yeah, and he said he wanted to call it throw a prawn on the Barbie because they call them prawns.
Yes.
But then they were like, no, you got to call it a shrimp because you're going for the American market, which is just like this movie.
That's a cool point I never thought about. I mean, I knew that about South Africa.
Yeah.
But, you know, it makes sense.
But so it makes it, that's one of those expressions that people still say. They don't even maybe recognize that it's a Paul Hogan thing. And, you know, whether it's like the Subaru Outback or, you know, all of these things that sort of, you know, give Australia this thing that Americans anyway can kind of like wrap their heads around and go, that's cool and that's interesting and different.
The country that brought you Thor.
I know, right? So Chris Hemsworth.
All the Hemsworths.
Well, Paul Hogan talked about how they should have gotten Hugh Jackman like 10 or 15, maybe 20 years ago to be the new Australian tourism person.
They really should have.
Because he's cool and he's popular with everybody and he's Australian and he's a
Maybe
great,
they asked
sweet
and he
guy.
said no. I don't know.
Because
he participated in the Super Bowl ad, right? The big, are we going to get a Dundee movie that happened a few years ago? Yeah, I feel like he made a lot of, I mean, they got his mini, they got Chris Hemsworth, they got a lot of different actors and actresses. I love Chris Hemsworth in that ad. If you haven't seen that Super Bowl ad, because I certainly hadn't, because sports, I don't know. But I did watch the ad. I had never even heard that they did it. Was it because the Hemsworth was in it?
No, I watched it for this podcast. Oh, okay. It was cool. I really enjoyed it. I totally bought it too. It was like, because they set it up like
it's for free. You don't have to buy it.
No, it's not.
It's really embarrassing.
You have
to buy the ad. You have to pay for ads.
That's a really great idea.
Just to sell ads.
To sell ads.
Oh, that's gold, Jerry. Let's
to
do it.
not just to YouTube, but to people. This thing is so cool. You have to pay to even know about it.
Yeah. I feel like this has been tried, with those meetings they try to get you to come to. But now the meetings can come to you. It's not a pyramid scheme, it's a triangle club.
Oh, I love that. It's only half of a pyramid.
Yeah. So it's not really a triangle, it's just half.
It's just one side. It's just a side.
Yeah, it's like it's a half of a two-dimensional pyramid.
Right. Anyway.
Everybody, geometry jokes. That's why you came. But you stayed for the movie talk.
So we also mentioned this, but we didn't really talk about the fact that Paul Hogan had been married and had like 3 or 4 kids with his first wife.
Yeah, 3 kids.
And that's right. And then he meets this Linda, whatever her name is, the blonde lady in the Crocodile Dundee movies, and he ends up leaving his wife and marrying her. And then,
which is funny because Siskel and Ebert said that there was no on-screen chemistry.
True.
And at the time they were filming, these 2 people were actually falling in love.
But were they? Audience, what's your diagnosis? She apparently, whenever she would go down to do film stuff in Australia, the people in Australia were so angry at her because his original wife was like a regular, like just like he had been, a totally regular Australian lady who was a mom. And, she says she had 3 kids, but by the time he got with this lady, his kids were grown. So it wasn't like he had small children in the house.
Yeah, apparently they'd been not super cordial for a long time.
Yeah.
But that wasn't well known. It wasn't public knowledge.
He did end up marrying this chick, but they stayed married for I think it was 20 years.
For a while, yeah.
And then, they got divorced too.
And they parted peacefully as far as I can tell.
Yeah. They still, because they have a kid together too. And so, yes, whatever. But
yeah, everybody's like, okay, whatever, we did that.
And then you said something about tax evasion, something.
Yeah, it's all in Wikipedia. I don't do this show to drag everybody's dirty laundry out, but he was accused of harboring cash from the Crocodile Dundee movie in offshore accounts. And it started to sound...
That's unheard of.
It started to sound really familiar. And my gut instinct, and I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of the imagination, is that I think that they made some decisions when they thought the movie might be a little smaller, sort of a la Office Space. Like, hey, this is a good idea. And then they wake up the next day and they're like, holy cow, we just made $10 million that are now being stored in a tax haven.
Gotcha.
I'm wondering if something like that happened. And then there's just some more Hollywoody kind of people shell games, people moving money around, and it's not really clear whose money it is.
People with millions of dollars never do that, though.
Yeah. Because, it's he's done a really good job of presenting to us, the public, a very... hey, that's dumb. Don't do that with money. And I didn't do anything wrong. And these people are crazy. And I don't like these tax people.
Is he a con man or?
I would never.
I'm saying that I don't know Paul Hogan as a person, but I will say that if you listen to an interview with him, you'll be hard pressed to not think he does have high charisma, much like the character that he plays in this movie. He's very likable, very down to earth. He's extremely humble. Every time the lady who I listened to the interview, it was somewhat painful, she keeps asking about the award show that he was on. And, what were you thinking? Do you even understand the impact you've had on all of these things? And she kept asking him that over and over again. Do you know what you've done for the people of Australia? Do you even understand? Do you really get it? And eventually I was like, dude, stop. And eventually he just says, no.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah, that's horrible.
I want you to just go out and listen to that interview.
I do need to. Just so I can be miserable on my drive home from the studio.
Yeah, it'll be like that time that I made you watch that Jay Leno's Garage with the guys with the Knight Rider cart. Anything else on Crocodile Dundee? Did you ever find the last person that you wanted to?
I did, and then I quickly wandered away from it. His name is, okay, so this guy's not as famous as the other 2. But he's someone that kind of stuck out to me because we just on our live stream last week, we brought up Babylon 5. And, this person who was in Babylon 5 is a very creepy character. Also made appearances in Star Trek episodes of John Snyder. You may know him as the pimp in this movie, where the one that gets knocked out by Paul Hogan on the back of a taxi cab.
Nice.
But yeah, the second I saw Babylon 5, I was like, this is perfect. I've got to go find out more about this guy. So, it's just something that he will watch this, or you will watch this, and you'll recognize him from something Star Trek or Babylon 5 related if you were fans of those shows.
Cool.
Dun, dun.
I will say that I really enjoyed the soundtrack of this movie. It had a really cool
I think they used it better in 2.
Yeah, I do. But when I watched the opening credits of this movie, I just really like that. It's got a really cool lilting melody to it.
It's kind of got a Dave Grusin quality, if you remember him from New Age music of the mid to late 80s.
Nope.
Dave Grusin.
I feel like I'm on NPR right now.
Thank you.
Dave Grusin. But
this show
the
is
guy
funded
who
by
did the
users like you.
music,
You're listening to Echoes.
he did several other Australian movies that I'm not familiar with, but he didn't really do anything else that I've ever seen. But I really loved his approach because it sort of doesn't sound like anything else I've ever heard. Some composers just have like a sound, like you can always tell that's that guy, and that's
not
the same.
John Williams.
It's not just John Williams, but yes, he's certainly one of them. Although if it's one of those, John Williams is one that it's like, oh well, if it's good, it's John Williams. But
yeah, definitely, he's got a knack for it. But after that many Harry Potter movies, I was ready for a little different tune.
I liked it. Well, you also aren't huge on the Lord of the Rings music, and I love it. I could listen to it all the time.
I liked it a lot.
You played
in hour 1 through 4 of the first movie. By the end of the last movie, I was getting a little.
But they had new themes, like the Rohirrim. And
it's just like, I can't hear that one more time. And I made the mistake of playing. There was a game for the Xbox One that was really repetitive. So you do a mission and you go back to the lobby of the game, and then it was right back to that same song. So it's not really fair that I feel that way. I also blasted that song into my brain by playing that Xbox game.
You're right, it's not fair. I don't give you permission to feel that way.
Fair enough.
Well, Crocodile Dundee, everyone. That was a fun, weird
I went down a lot more gopher holes than I expected to.
Yeah.
Going into this show, so.
For sure.
Now I'm all out of words.
Little side note, final thought.
Too bad I'm out of words.
Okay, well, you don't have to have a final thought.
After this one.
Okay. Michael was talking about this, and he said something about the second movie, and you did too. Like, oh, well, the second movie, I've seen it way more than the first movie. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen the second movie. And
this is one of the few movies that I've seen that you haven't.
Yeah.
I think.
And I had never seen it.
Like, literally, that's every other movie that's she's seen it, I haven't. But
I was like, I don't think I've seen that. You guys started describing it. And I was like, I don't think I've seen it. And I fully expected that because I bought it on Amazon streaming. And I was like, when I watch this, I'm going to be like, oh, I've seen this. But I didn't. I had never seen it.
Because it did make its rounds. It was very popular on TV and other places, like edited for TV kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's somehow totally missed it. But I did really enjoy it almost more than the first one.
Right now, I would say I prefer it to the first one, but the first one does have a special place because it feels very authentic.
Yeah.
Like Paul Hogan wrote it. He's not the best writer in the world, but he's pretty darn good, and he made a cute little love story.
He certainly had funny moments in a love story. Had some awkward, unfortunate parts, but it's just sort of you take the good with the bad, or you just hate it, or whatever you want to do. But
they made sense in context. They didn't just come from a psychopathic place. Like, I'm going to do an evil thing. Yeah.
The second movie has more stakes. More of like, the girl gets kidnapped and he goes and rescues her. And he's kind of more of, in my mind, he's more of a badass in the second one. The first
Without
one,
being murderous.
Right. But he's not.
The image of him, swinging the little. With the sun
to sort
setting.
Of communicate with the
It's a very iconic.
It's great.
Just image from that.
Yeah. Yeah, that movie's got a lot going for it.
But I think this is probably after, the first one, they were like, hey, you want to come blow up 800 people in a new version of Rambo or Commando? And he thought, do you think he went, I'll make an adventure movie for you where I don't have to kill everyone for it to be good?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he nailed it. That just the idea of
But there is a body count, and I think the body count's certainly higher in the second movie than in the first. So in that way, it was his own little First Blood part too.
yeah, I feel like that he wasn't necessarily behind the sights on some of those. But
Yeah.
it's
Wow.
been a little while. Maybe I'm just like kind of glossing
No,
over.
I don't think so. But there were people who died, whereas in the first movie, I don't think anybody dies.
Yeah, no. But there were drug dealers in the second movie.
Yeah.
and they,
Am I wrong? Like the guy falls off the
they
cliff.
straight up
I'm pretty
murdered
sure.
her ex-husband.
Yeah.
At the beginning.
And then so she shot the guy, and I don't know if she killed him. I can't remember the end.
Probably had to by the end. I just remember Paul's first resort was not, I'm going to just go kill everyone. He's kind of, but if they follow him into his backyard, they might get eaten by something.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. You can check us out on YouTube, of course.
On the internet.
On the internet. Just you can go to youtube.com/retroblasting. You can go on Patreon, also on the Patreons. And Aaron and I are going to start, possibly doing our own thing on the Patreons as well, like every so often.
That reminds me, I need to get you to, I don't have that login for the Patreon for
I need to give that to
Don't
you.
give it to me right now because this would be a really bad
That would
time
be awkward,
to
I think.
do
I
that.
feel like
But
it would
after we
after
stop
the-
recording,
after
you
the
could,
button.
then it would
Right,
be safe to do
sure.
that.
But yeah, you can. We post. Michael posts a lot of stuff on there every day. He has like a Michael's morning message, which is
awkward.
It's kind of awkward, but it's funny.
Brothers and sisters.
And a lot of behind the scenes, like what it's like sort of in the studio here, us goofing around on live stream days, stuff like that. And so that's
so
kind of
much
cool.
fun. We had so much, especially when the microphone started to fall off of the table last time.
That was awesome.
I was just
It was
enjoying watching
so
you
real.
melt down over there.
Just real. So, check that out if you're interested in that. And until then, we will see you or hear you, or you will hear us anyway, on the next podcast.
We do not hear you. I don't want you to be
You can just, if
confused.
you yell a little louder.
If I hear you when you yell a little louder, I'm going to get scared and try to help you.
That's not a knife.
All of these are knives.
All right, bye.
Bye.